Just make the mark, Ruth. Mason's smile never moved when he said it. That made the insult worse. 300 people were watching us beneath the iron rafters of Conestoga Foundry Hall employees, officials, reporters, and the North Star MedTech acquisition team. A 40-foot screen behind us displayed photographs of my life, my first rented workbench, my late husband Daniel holding a box of hand-cut gears, our daughter Kate asleep beneath a drafting table, and the factory that carried our name. On the table lay a gold pen and a ceremonial document transferring my voting shares into something Mason called the Ellison Modernization Foundation. He leaned close enough for his breath to touch my ear. "Nobody expects you to understand the transaction," he whispered. "Smile for the cameras and sign where I showed you." My son-in-law believed he had reduced me to an old woman in a blue dress, useful only as decoration at my own company's funeral. I did not argue. I looked instead at the anniversary watch beside the document. Mason had presented it as a tribute to my original regulator design. Through its glass back, I saw the balance wheel trembling too quickly. The second's hand was gaining time in short, nervous jumps. That watch was running on the same counterfeit spring that had nearly destroyed everything. So I smiled, lowered the pen, and wrote my name. Mason never noticed the extra line I added beneath it. He was too busy believing he had won. Before I tell you what I wrote, and why the buyer's attorney closed the contract, without signing, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever been treated as though age erased your judgment, leave a comment, tap like, and subscribe. What happened next began with 11 missing minutes. 8 weeks earlier, I was standing alone in the restoration room at Ellison Precision Instruments, holding a hospital safety timer that should not have been on my bench. My name is Ruth Ellison. I was 70 years old that fall, though age had never seemed important until other people began using it to explain things they did not want me to notice. For 41 years, I had built mechanical timing systems designed to keep dangerous processes honest. Our assemblies controlled sterilization cycles in hospitals, release sequences in commercial fire suppression systems, and shutdown intervals in industrial equipment. A short cycle could leave contamination where nobody could see it. Time in my profession was not an opinion. It was evidence. The timer had been returned by St. Agnes Medical Center after a technician noticed that a 60-minute sterilization cycle had ended early. According to the complaint form clipped to the box, the chamber door had unlocked after 49 minutes. 11 minutes missing, no patient had been harmed. The hospital caught the discrepancy before release. But the unit carried our name on its brass faceplate, and I had spent my adult life teaching apprentices that a maker's name was not decoration. It was a promise. The restoration room had once been my private workshop. Mason had renamed it the Heritage Gallery and moved most of my tools behind glass. Visitors could admire our old lathe, though no one could touch it. My oak bench remained in the corner because it was too heavy to move without taking down a wall. I set the timer beneath the inspection lamp and removed the back plate. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Good clock oil is light and nearly odorless. The lubricant inside that timer smelled sharp and synthetic, more suited to power tools than medical equipment. The second thing I noticed was the regulator spring. It was bright, almost blue beneath the lamp. Our approved alloy had a duller gray finish. More important, the inner coil sat a fraction too close to the balance arm. Under repeated heat, that spring would soften, shorten the oscillation, and make the mechanism run fast. I reached for my loop. A younger engineer might have blamed fatigue. I did not. Fatigue leaves uneven stress along the coil. This spring had been wrong from the moment it was made. The door opened behind me. "Ruth?" Mason entered without knocking, followed by my daughter, Kate, and Dana Mercer, the plant controller. Mason wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the uniform of a man who wanted workers to believe he was informal while his shoes said otherwise. Kate stopped when she saw the open timer. "Mom, you're not supposed to be handling active returns." "I designed this model. That isn't the point," Mason said gently. His tone was always gentlest when he was taking something away. He crossed the room and rested one hand on the bench. "Customer returns have to stay inside the new quality control chain. North Star's auditors are reviewing our procedures. This unit ended a sterilization cycle 11 minutes early. Dana gave a small laugh, then covered it with a cough. Mason looked at the complaint form. Probably shipping damage. Shipping damage doesn't change the alloy. For half a second, his eyes shifted toward the open case. Then the concern returned. We changed subcontractors during the supply disruption, he said. Some visual differences are expected. The parts passed digital calibration. I held the spring beneath the lamp. This one could not have passed a proper heat test. Kate folded her arms. You haven't seen the new testing system, no, I said. But I have seen metal. The silence that followed was small but revealing. Dana stepped forward and closed the timer's lid without asking me. I'll send it to claims. I placed my hand over the box. What machine produced this serial number? Dana glanced at Mason. It was quick, barely a movement, but watchmakers live by barely. Mason picked up the complaint form and read the number aloud. EP 174408. The room seemed to tighten around me. I knew that prefix. I had assigned it to line 17, the most reliable cutting machine we ever owned. But line 17 had been dismantled 9 years earlier, after a cracked foundation threw its tolerances out of balance. Daniel and I had watched a crane lift it through the factory roof. Yet the hospital timer in front of me had supposedly come from that dead machine 6 months ago. Someone had not merely installed the wrong spring, someone was manufacturing a past that no longer existed. I kept my hand on the timer box. Line 17 has been gone for 9 years, I said. Dana Mercer's expression did not change, but the muscles near her mouth tightened. Mason looked almost relieved. That explains it. He crossed to the wall monitor and woke the screen. A chart of production numbers appeared, clean and bright, and designed to make complicated things look harmless. When we migrated the old manufacturing records into the new system, the software converted several retired line codes into product family identifiers. 17 no longer means the physical machine, it means the regulator series that originally came from that line. He spoke without hesitation. It was a good explanation, not a true one, I suspected, but good lies rarely sound impossible. They sound efficient. Kate looked at me as if Mason had settled the matter. You see, it's a data label, then why wasn't I told the numbering system had changed? Mason gave a patient smile. Because you asked to step away from daily operations. I asked to stop attending 6-hour budget meetings. I did not ask to become a stranger in my own factory. Kate looked toward the glass cases displaying my old tools. Mom, nobody is making you a stranger. That was precisely what they were doing, though perhaps Kate could not see it because she had spent most of her life believing the company belonged between us. Ellison Precision began before Kate was born in the back room of a jewelry repair shop on Queen Street. Daniel and I rented 2 benches beside a furnace that overheated every afternoon. I repaired railroad watches and marine chronometers. Daniel cut gears for local machine shops after closing time. We had no investors and no family money. We had a second-hand lathe, unpaid invoices, and the stubborn conviction that a machine should do exactly what its maker promised. Our first major contract came from a regional hospital that needed a mechanical failsafe for an aging sterilizer. Daniel and I built a sealed timing assembly with a redundant release wheel. I spent 3 nights adjusting the balance spring until the test unit lost less than 2 seconds across a full day. That contract became 12 contracts, then 50. By the time Kate was 6, we had moved into the old Clockworks building on Water Street. The factory smelled of machine oil, brass dust, and the coffee Daniel kept forgetting on the hot plate. Kate grew up there. She did homework in the inspection office. She learned multiplication by counting trays of screws. She could identify a faulty escapement by sound before she could properly spell the word. But she also waited. She waited in dance shoes while I finished production meetings. She waited at school concerts for the empty chair beside Daniel. She waited through birthdays postponed because a supplier had failed or a hospital needed replacement parts. I told myself I was building security for her. Children do not experience security as a future balance sheet. They experience whether their mother is sitting in the audience. The worst absence came when Kate was 17. She had won a statewide debate competition and was giving the final speech in Harrisburg. I promised I would be there, That morning, a shipment of defective springs arrived 2 days before a federal inspection. If I left, the line would stop. Daniel offered to stay. I told him I was the only one who could recalibrate the assembly. By the time I reached Harrisburg, the auditorium was empty. Kate stood beneath the stone arch outside, still wearing her blue competition jacket. She never shouted, she simply said, "The factory always has an emergency." 26 years later, I could still hear the flatness in her voice. Mason understood that wound before I did. He entered our lives 4 years after Daniel died, when the company had begun to lose ground. Hospitals were shifting toward integrated electronic systems. 2 major customers merged and demanded lower prices. Our sales director retired, and I rejected 3 modernization proposals because each treated craftsmanship as an unnecessary expense. Mason arrived as a restructuring consultant. He was polished without being oily, confident without appearing arrogant. He listened to employees. He spent evenings walking the production floor with Luis Ortega. He asked me detailed questions about failure tolerances and supply chains. Most importantly, he listened to Kate. She was our financial vice president, and still waiting for me to admit she was capable of leading something I had built. Mason treated her opinions as strategic insight. Within a year, they were married. Within 2, he had renegotiated our hospital contracts, introduced digital inventory controls, and secured a line of credit that carried us through the worst quarter in company history. He had not saved Ellison Precision alone, though that was how Kate remembered it. But he had helped. That truth made my suspicion dangerous. It is easy to distrust a villain. It is harder to distrust a man who once stood beside you when the numbers were red and the bank was impatient. Mason lifted the hospital timer from beneath my hand. "I'll have quality assurance run a complete diagnostic," he said. "If there is a supplier problem, we'll address it. I want the written heat test results. You'll have them." Dana placed the unit back into its foam case and carried it toward the door. I watched her leave Ruth. Mason said, "There is one other housekeeping matter." He opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of papers clipped with blue tabs. Kate shifted closer to him. "These are not new contracts," she said quickly. "They're simply acknowledgments." "Of what?" Mason laid the first page on my bench. The heading read, "Founder Review and Legacy Comment Certification." He explained that North Star's preliminary auditors had identified gaps in the transition records. Because many older specifications originated under my authority, the buyer wanted confirmation that the legacy parts still used in current production had been properly reviewed. The papers covered 6 months, the same 6 months in which a dead machine had supposedly produced a hospital timer. Mason uncapped his pen and placed it beside my hand. "It's routine," he said. "Just sign the blue tabs." I turned the first page. At the bottom was a statement declaring that I had personally inspected and approved every legacy component batch listed in the attached schedules. I had never seen those schedules. I looked up at my daughter. Kate would not meet my eyes. Kate's refusal to look at me answered the question before I asked it. "How long have you known about these papers?" Her eyes moved toward Mason. That small movement hurt more than any answer she could have given. "They came from North Star's preliminary review," she said. "We discussed them yesterday, the executive team." I looked at the title printed beneath my name, Founder and Technical Authority. "They wanted my reputation without my authority. I will not certify batches I did not inspect." Mason's expression remained calm. "Nobody is asking you to lie. The document says I personally reviewed them. It's legal language. Legal language becomes very literal when something fails." Kate exhaled through her nose. "Mom, this is exactly what Mason has been trying to explain. The company cannot function if every routine document becomes a trial." I slid the papers back across the bench. "Then find someone who considers false certification routine." Mason did not argue. He gathered the pages, aligned their edges against the oak surface, and placed them inside his portfolio. "Take the evening," he said. "Read them at home. We can revisit this tomorrow." I already read the sentence that matters. A shadow crossed his face, gone so quickly another person might have missed it. "I'm trying to protect what you built, Ruth." "No," I said. "You're asking me to protect something you changed." Kate left first. Mason followed her, closing the door gently behind him. That gentleness stayed with me. People imagine control arrives with shouting, slammed doors, or threats. Often it arrives through softened voices and reasonable procedures. By the time the lock clicks, everyone insists it was installed for your safety. I returned the next morning at 7. For most of my life, the factory had been awake before sunrise. The tool room lights glowed behind wired glass. Compressors shuddered to life. Metal carts rattled across concrete. The building possessed a rhythm before the offices filled with polished shoes and conference calls. But the restoration room was silent. A brass plaque had been mounted outside the door overnight. The Ellison Legacy Experience Founders Workshop, established 1983. I stood beneath those words with my key in my hand. Inside, a velvet rope surrounded my oak bench. My magnifying lamps had been unplugged. The precision screwdrivers were arranged in a glass case. Daniel's first gear-cutting jig sat beneath a small spotlight beside a printed card describing it as an example of obsolete manual production. Obsolete, I had used that jig 3 days earlier to repair a regulator older than Mason. My stool was gone. In its place stood a narrow pedestal, holding a black and white photograph of me at 32, my hair tied beneath a scarf, my hands dark with polishing compound. The woman in the photograph looked ready to work. The woman standing in front of it had been turned into an exhibit. Mason appeared in the doorway carrying 2 coffees. I hoped you'd like it. What happened to my stool? Storage and the tools. Preserved tools are preserved by using them. He offered me one of the cups. I did not take it. The acquisition team will tour this floor next week, he said. Your history matters, Ruth. We're giving it the presentation it deserves. My history is not over. Of course not. Again, that careful tone. He stepped inside but remained outside the velvet rope, as though respecting a boundary he had created around me. Northstar's insurer raised concerns about unsupervised access to active production areas, he continued. Until the acquisition review is complete, you'll need an escort beyond the administrative wing. I own 42% of this company. You own shares. Safety rules apply to everyone. And who requested this restriction? The Compliance Committee, which you chair temporarily. I looked past him into the corridor. 2 employees slowed as they walked by, then quickly looked away. Humiliation works best with witnesses who pretend they saw nothing. Mason placed both coffees on the pedestal beside my photograph. I know this transition is difficult, do you? I watched my father lose a business because he could not let go. He mistook control for purpose until there was nothing left to control. It was the first time he had compared me to his father. Mason rarely spoke about him, except to say that the man had been impractical and proud. I wondered how long he had been waiting to use that story against me. You should reconsider the certification papers, he said. A public disagreement now could alarm the buyer and cost employees their bonuses. There it was, not a threat against me, a warning that my stubbornness might injure everyone else. He left the coffee cooling beside the younger version of my face. I waited until the corridor emptied, then unhooked the velvet rope. The glass case was locked, but the key remained in the old cabinet where I had kept it for 20 years. Either Mason did not know, or believed I would obey the symbolism of the lock. I opened the case and removed my loop, tweezers and micrometer. Then I went to the tall steel sample cabinet in the rear corner. Inside were reference components from every major product generation we had manufactured. Each tray carried a date, alloy specification, supplier code, and inspection initials. The samples were not sentimental. They were our physical memory. When records disagreed, metal did not. I unlocked the drawer labeled Regulator Springs, 2014 to 2018. The approved samples lay in narrow paper sleeves. One sleeve was empty, batch R1744. The same batch family printed on the failed hospital timer. I checked the sign-out card clipped inside the drawer. No name, no date, no authorization. Someone had removed the one physical sample that could prove what line 17 had actually produced. A knock sounded behind me. I turned quickly. Luis Ortega stood in the doorway holding a worn clipboard against his chest. He had supervised the night tool room for 17 years and trusted machines more easily than managers. His eyes dropped to the open sample drawer. You found it missing, he said. You knew? I knew something was being taken. I didn't know from where. He stepped inside and closed the door. Mason changed the scrap contractor 3 months ago, Luis said quietly. The rejected springs and regulator plates are supposed to leave every Thursday afternoon. But twice this month, an unmarked van came through the south loading gate after 2 in the morning. Who authorized it? Dana, did you see what they took? Locked scrap containers, full ones. Rejected precision metal was valuable, but not valuable enough to justify secret midnight collections. Why didn't you report it? Luis looked toward the hallway. My wife starts another round of treatment Monday. I need the insurance. His shame was unnecessary, but real. Then he leaned closer. Last night, the van didn't take scrap out. What did it do? It brought 3 containers back in. 3 containers came back in. I asked. Luis nodded. Same seals, same serial tags, but they were heavier when they returned. Where are they now? Bay 14. Dana told me not to open them. That instruction told me more than an open lid might have. Bay 14 sat beyond the machining cells and automated inspection stations. Mason liked to show visitors. My new restrictions meant I could not simply walk there without creating a scene. So I did something I had not done easily in 30 years. I asked permission. Mason was in the glass conference room with Kate and 2 North Star representatives when I approached. He stepped into the corridor. What do you need? I want to inspect the anniversary exhibit inventory. Daniel's original spring-winding mandrel was stored in Bay 14 after the roof leak. That was true. It was also irrelevant. Mason studied my face, then called a production coordinator named Neil to escort me. Please don't wander into active cells, he said. North Star is sensitive about liability. I thanked him. The words tasted like metal. Neil was 26 and so uncomfortable supervising me that he explained every safety stripe we crossed. I let him. A person who believes he is teaching you rarely wonders what you are observing. Bay 14 held obsolete fixtures, damaged cabinets, and equipment awaiting disposal. The 3 scrap containers stood beneath gray tarps. Their security seals were new. The contractor labels said Lancaster Alloy Recovery. But the locking bands carried a different manufacturer's stamp than the ones Luis had shown me. I found Daniel's mandrel and handed it to Neil. There's another display piece in that cabinet, I said, pointing across the bay. Would you bring it down? My shoulder has been bothering me. He hurried to help. While his back was turned, I crouched beside the nearest container. The lid had a narrow inspection slot. Through it, I saw regulator plates stacked beneath bent brass strips. Their edges were scratched, and several carried red rejection marks. But the mounting holes were clean. Rejected plates from assembly carried compression rings around those holes. These had never been installed. I slid my tweezers through the slot and lifted one spring. Bright blue steel, the same wrong color as the hospital timer. What are you doing? Neil stood behind me. I rose, looking for a dropped label. Before he could answer, Dana's voice cut across the bay. Mrs. Ellison. She approached with a tablet under one arm. Dana had worked for me 14 years. Until that morning, I had never heard her use Mrs. Ellison inside my own factory. These containers are restricted, she said. So I've been told. They contain reclaimed training parts. Training parts don't require midnight deliveries. Neil looked between us. Dana dismissed him with a glance. He carried Daniel's gear away. When we were alone, she lowered her voice. The new supplier runs a closed-loop recycling program. Defective metal leaves the plant, gets sorted, then returns for non-production training use. The midnight schedule avoids interfering with hospital shipments. It was plausible. A closed-loop program could explain the returned containers. Clean mounting holes could mean the plates were stamped for apprentice practice. Even the new seals fit her story, but the blue springs did not. A recycled training part might be ugly, scratched, or incomplete. It should never be precise enough to enter a live mechanism. These pieces had been made to work, then disguised to look worthless. Wire training components made from finished regulator alloy. They aren't. They're lower-grade substitutes. Then they should not carry production geometry. Dana's fingers tightened around the tablet. Ruth, the manufacturing process has changed. Not every variation is evidence of misconduct. She stepped between me and the containers. Open it, I can't. It's under vendor custody until the recycling audit is complete. Then show me the agreement. You no longer oversee procurement. Not an answer, a border. I think you should return to restoration, she said. I left without arguing. By noon, the hospital timer had disappeared from the quality control system. Its complaint number returned no result. The heat test report Mason promised never arrived. At 2, Kate came to the restoration room carrying the timer's digital file. Mason said you were interrogating Dana. I asked her to open a box. Kate set the tablet on my bench. The hospital unit passed digital calibration when it left us. The damage occurred after delivery. The report displayed green check marks, each stamped with a date, time, technician ID, and automated approval code. I enlarged the final entry October 3, 6:42 a.m. The timer had supposedly completed a 6-hour heat stability test at that moment. Line 3, where that model was assembled, did not begin operating until 7. That proves nothing, Kate said. The system could use coordinated time. Our network has never used coordinated time. Mason says it does now. I studied the technician ID DM204, Dana Mercer. The file claimed Dana personally approved the test. Dana had been in Chicago that morning. I remembered because she called me from O'Hare after her flight was canceled. Kate's confidence wavered, only for a second. Someone may have used her credentials. Then the report is not reliable. I'll ask Dana where she was. Kate picked up the tablet. You're turning every mistake into a conspiracy. And you're turning every answer from Mason into a fact. Her face closed. I regretted the words before the door shut. That evening, I returned to my home workshop and placed the blue spring beneath the comparison microscope. Beside it, I positioned an approved Ellison spring from the last verified line 17 batch. The shapes were almost identical, almost. Near the inner coil, a microscopic triangular indentation had been pressed into the counterfeit metal. I enlarged the hospital timer photograph. The same triangle appeared beneath its regulator plate. Then I checked our old tooling archive. Only one supplier in our history had used a triangular inspection punch. Vail Component Recovery. The company had been incorporated 11 months earlier. Its registered agent was Mason's former business partner. By 8 the next morning, I had printed the incorporation record for Vail Component Recovery, the filing that named Mason's former partner, and enlarged photographs of the triangular mark on both springs. I should have called Priya Shah. I should have sealed the spring, documented who had handled it, and waited for an independent laboratory to verify the alloy. I knew that, but knowledge and judgment are not the same thing when your daughter is standing behind the wrong man. I went to Mason's office. He was meeting with Grant Sutter, our procurement director, and Dana Mercer. I entered without knocking and laid the documents across his conference table. Vail Component Recovery, I said. Why is a company tied to your former partner supplying parts to Ellison Precision? Grant leaned forward. They don't supply production parts, they remove scrap, Dana said. I placed the enlarged photograph beside her hand, then explained why their inspection mark is inside a hospital timer. Mason did not touch the papers. Where did you get the spring? From a return container in Bay 14. Dana's eyes sharpened. You removed vendor-controlled material. One spring through the inspection slot. Grant sat back. That was when I understood I had given them exactly what they needed. Mason folded his hands. Ruth, those containers were sealed pending audit, and one contained parts matching a defective medical timer. You have no proof the spring came from that unit. I have 2 matching tool marks. You have photographs taken in your private workshop, and a component you removed without authorization. His voice remained low, reasonable, concerned. Grant cleared his throat. Vail Recovery processes scrap from several manufacturers. A common punch mark would not establish origin. Then open the containers and inventory them. We will, Mason said. Through the proper process, I looked at Dana. You certified a 6-hour heat test at 6:42 in the morning while you were stranded at O'Hare. For the first time, she looked startled. Then she recovered. My credentials generated the batch release. I did not physically conduct every test. The report says you did. That's a formatting issue. A formatting issue that puts your name on a test before the line was operating. Mason stood. That is enough. No, it is the beginning. His expression changed, not anger, calculation. You entered restricted storage, removed controlled material, and took proprietary components off-site, he said. Now you are accusing 3 employees of fraud based on a serial number conversion and a mark you found under your own microscope. I asked questions, you came here with a verdict. He pushed the papers back toward me. Go home, Ruth, let compliance investigate. I should have left. Instead, I said, you're trying to make defective inventory disappear before Northstar's review. The room went still. Mason looked almost sad. You have spent your whole life believing suspicion is the same as precision, he said. It isn't. I carried the papers back to the restoration room, furious with him and more furious with myself. At 10:17, the factory alarm sounded. It was not the rising pulse of a fire signal. It was the hard, repeating horn for a line safety shutdown. Red lights flashed above the corridor doors. Employees stepped away from machines while supervisors called out evacuation zones. Safety interlock failure in Assembly Cell 6, the speakers announced. Clear the east production floor. I moved toward the door. A security officer blocked me. Mrs. Ellison, please remain here. Through the glass wall, I saw workers gathering near the exits. No smoke, no injury response. 2 technicians ran toward Cell 6 carrying lockout equipment. 20 minutes later, Mason entered with Kate and the head of security. Was anyone hurt? I asked. No, Mason said. Neil caught the pressure spike before the test chamber cycled. The security chief placed a tablet on my bench. A camera view showed the east production corridor at 9:52. A woman in my gray shop coat approached Cell 6. Her face was turned away. She held an old founder badge against the reader. The door opened. The next clip showed her leaving 4 minutes later. At 10:16, the chamber's secondary pressure interlock failed. Kate stared at me. Mom, that is not me. The security chief opened an access log. My founder badge number appeared beside the entry. I reached into my handbag. The badge was gone. I keep it in the inside pocket, I said. Kate looked at the gray coat hanging beside the old photograph of me. You were in the factory all morning, she said. I was here. Did anyone see you? I thought of the empty corridor and the hours I had spent alone enlarging photographs. No, her eyes filled, not with anger, but something worse. Fear of me. Mason stepped closer to her. She shifted toward him. This is what I was afraid of, he said quietly. I looked at him. You staged this. Kate flinched. Listen to yourself, she said. The badge was stolen. The coat was copied. Someone wants the board to believe I tampered with that cell. Why would anyone do that? To stop me from exposing the parts. Mason turned to the security chief. Preserve every recording and access log. Nobody is deleting anything. It was the perfect instruction, public, responsible, impossible to challenge. Kate covered her mouth. Mom, did you enter Cell 6 to prove the new system was unsafe? No. Did you touch anything? I was never there. Mason requested an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. By 3 o'clock, my production privileges had been suspended. My badge was formally deactivated. I was forbidden from entering operational areas without written approval. Kate voted in favor. I sat through the decision without defending myself again. Every denial only strengthened Mason's story, that grief and pride had made me reckless. Afterward, alone in the restoration room, I replayed the footage. The woman reached toward the access panel with her right hand. Her sleeve pulled back. A silver watch flashed at her wrist. I stopped the video and enlarged the frame. The watch was worn on her right arm. I had worn mine on the left every day since I was 12. And I knew exactly one woman in that factory who wore a watch on the wrong hand. Dana Mercer wore her watch on her right wrist. I had noticed it for years because she was left-handed. When she signed checks or reviewed ledgers, the watch stayed out of her way on the opposite arm. The woman in the security video moved like Dana, too. A turned shoulder, a pause before the badge reader, the slight outward angle of one foot. Details a lawyer could dismiss as imagination. Confronting her would only repeat my mistake. I closed the video and sat in the dark restoration room until the evening shift began. Through the glass wall, I watched employees pass the exhibit Mason had built around my life. I finally understood what he had accomplished. He had created a version of events in which every attempt to defend myself became evidence against me. If I demanded access, I was controlling. If I questioned a record, I was confused by modernization. If I searched for evidence, I was sabotaging the company. A mechanism cannot be repaired while it is under tension. First, the pressure must be released. The next morning, I asked Mason for a private meeting. He received me in the executive conference room. Kate sat beside him with a legal pad. Dana was absent. I wore a gray cardigan instead of my usual tailored jacket. I carried no papers. Mason gestured toward a chair. "How are you feeling?" It was a carefully chosen question. "Embarrassed," I said. Kate's pen stopped. "I handled this badly. I saw the failed timer, became frightened, and decided every inconsistency proved someone was hiding something." Mason watched me without blinking. "I should not have removed material from a sealed container," I continued. "And I should not have accused anyone before compliance completed its review." Kate looked at me for the first time since the board meeting. "Mom, are you saying you entered cell 6? "No, I am saying my behavior made it easier for everyone to believe I did." That answer was true. Truth is useful inside a lie because it keeps the voice steady. Mason folded his hands. "What are you asking for?" "Nothing operational. I accept the badge suspension. The 40th anniversary is 8 weeks away, and the archive exhibit is unfinished. Let me concentrate on that." Kate's shoulders lowered. I turned to her. "You were right about one thing. I have treated stepping back as though it meant disappearing." Pain moved across her face. It was not forgiveness, but it was real. Mason asked, "You're willing to support the North Star transition?" "I am willing to stop fighting it in public." He studied me for several seconds, then smiled. "Then I think we can make this work." He offered me the title of Anniversary Curator. I would be allowed into the records annex, restoration room, and non-operational storage wing. I would appear in the anniversary film and give a speech praising the company's evolution. In exchange, I would issue a statement saying the Cell 6 incident had resulted from confusion surrounding outdated access credentials. I changed outdated to legacy and signed. The sentence admitted nothing. It did not say I entered the cell or caused the failure. It merely acknowledged confusion, and there was plenty of that. When the meeting ended, Kate followed me into the corridor. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making me choose again." Again, I wanted to tell her she had already chosen. Instead, I touched her arm. "I don't want the company between us anymore." Her eyes softened, but Mason called her back into the conference room. That afternoon, the velvet rope around my workbench disappeared. My tools remained behind glass, but Mason authorized a key for the anniversary exhibit. He also assigned Emma as my assistant 3 afternoons each week. My granddaughter arrived, carrying an engineering notebook and the nervous expression of someone entering disputed territory. "Dad says I'm supposed to digitize the archive. What do you say?" I say half these drawings are better than the files we use now. That was the first honest sentence I had heard inside the factory in days. We began with Daniel's original regulator plans. I taught Emma how to read handwritten tolerance notes and why one scratched correction could matter more than a clean digital revision. While we worked, I performed the role Mason had given me. I asked simple questions twice. I pretended to forget where archived files were kept. When Dana passed the glass wall, I let a screwdriver slip and waited for Emma to pick it up. Donna slowed, then kept walking. By the end of the week, people had stopped lowering their voices outside the restoration room. That was the first reward of appearing harmless. The second came from Mason. He brought me the anniversary speech draft and stood beside my bench while I read it. The language praised his modernization program 6 times and mentioned Daniel once. Near the final page was a paragraph stating that I had full confidence in the integrity of Ellison Precision's present leadership and production systems. "You need this sentence," I said. "We'd like it." "No, North Star needs it." His silence confirmed my guess. The buyer was purchasing more than machines and contracts. It was purchasing the Ellison name, and Mason needed the founder to bless the transaction publicly. Without me, his clean transition looked like a family dispute. With me smiling beside him, it looked legitimate. There was his first weakness. He could restrict me, humiliate me, and call me obsolete. But he could not complete his victory unless I stood on stage and helped him sell it. I handed back the speech. "I'll practice." That evening, Emma and I opened a cabinet of retired inspection tools for the exhibit. Every punch and gauge was listed on an inventory card dating back 20 years. One slot was empty. The label beneath it read, "Triangular Suppler Acceptance Punch." Decommission 2015. The tool that made the mark inside the counterfeit spring had not come from Vail Component Recovery. It had come from our own factory, and someone had removed it after Daniel died. The missing punch changed the shape of my suspicion. Until then, I had believed counterfeit components were entering Ellison Precision from outside. But the triangular mark had been made by a tool that once belonged to us. Someone had taken rejected parts, stamped them with a symbol connected to our old inspection system, and built a trail pointing backward toward my years in control. I photographed the empty slot, the inventory card, and the cabinet lock. Then I closed everything exactly as I had found it. Emma watched from the other side of the bench. "Are you going to tell Dad?" "No, Mom." "No, then who?" There was only one person I trusted to tell me I was wrong. Priya Shah had spent 30 years auditing medical device manufacturers. We first met in Baltimore, where she rejected an Ellison timer because one screw sat 0.02 of an inch outside specification. I called her unreasonable. She called me emotionally attached to my own work. We respected each other from that day forward. Priya had retired outside Philadelphia, though retirement had not softened her. When I phoned and said I needed help examining a suspicious regulator spring, she interrupted. "Where is the component now?" "In my workshop." "Who removed it?" "I did." "Was the container sealed?" "Yes." "Did you document the removal?" "No." "Then you do not have evidence, Ruth. You have a story. I have a matching tool mark. You have an object that passed through your hands without witnesses." Her answer angered me because it was correct. "I can bring you a customer-returned unit through official channels." "Can you?" I thought of Mason's control over quality records. "Not yet." "Then call me when you can." She hung up. For 2 days, I played anniversary curator. I cataloged Daniel's prototypes, approved photographs, and listened while employees spoke freely outside the restoration room. Mason had been right about one thing. People ignored decorative objects. On Thursday, a padded case arrived from St. Bridget's Hospital in Reading. The label identified an Ellison fire suppression delay timer returned for routine refurbishment. Because historical units had been added to the anniversary exhibit, Emma brought it directly to me. The paperwork was clean. The hospital's facilities director had signed the transfer form. The serial number, intake time, and exterior seal were recorded. 2 employees witnessed the package being opened. I did not touch the mechanism. Through the transparent cover, I saw the blue regulator spring. "Call Priya," I told Emma. Priya arrived the next morning carrying 2 metal cases and custody forms. She wore a navy suit and the expression of a woman who expected everyone to disappoint her. She inspected the documents before greeting me. "Who had access overnight?" "The case remained in the locked exhibit cabinet," Emma said. "Security camera covers the door." Priya looked at her. "And you are?" "Emma Vail, engineering apprentice, Mason Vail's daughter." "Yes, that complicates things. It also documents them," Emma said. "I signed the intake record." Priya's eyebrow rose slightly. Daniel would have liked her. We moved the sealed unit to an independent materials laboratory Priya used for consulting work. The owner, Dr. Samuel Reed, recorded the package before cutting the hospital seal. Each component received a numbered evidence bag. Priya refused to let me operate the equipment. "You are here as the complainant," she said, "not the examiner." I stood behind the observation window while Reed placed the timer inside a heating chamber. A certified reference clock ran beside it. At room temperature, the unit kept acceptable time. At 160 degrees, the balance began to climb. After 20 minutes, it had gained 38 seconds. After 40, nearly 4 minutes. At the end of the simulated cycle, the timer released 11 minutes and 12 seconds early. The same failure as the hospital unit. Nobody spoke for several moments. "One test proves a defective device," Priya said. "It does not prove a conspiracy." Reed removed the spring and examined it under a comparison microscope. The triangular punch appeared near the inner coil. He then ran an alloy analysis. Our approved springs used a heat-stable cobalt-nickel blend. The returned spring contained cheaper high-carbon steel, with a surface treatment imitating the proper finish. Under repeated heat, its tension changed predictably. "This was not an accidental substitution," Reed said. "The geometry is too precise. Someone manufactured a functional part from the wrong material. Priya signed the test sheet. Only then did she look at me. Now you have evidence. That afternoon, Luis called from a public phone outside his wife's treatment center. He would not meet at the factory, so Priya and I found him in a hospital cafeteria. He looked older than he had a week earlier. Luis placed a folder on the table. I keep duplicate disposal manifests. He said, the tool room has to reconcile weight before scrap leaves my custody. The copies showed 6 months of shipments to Lancaster Alloy Recovery. Each load was signed out as rejected precision metal. But the receiving weights were consistently 30 to 40% lower. Thousands of components had vanished between our loading dock and the recycler. What about the containers that came back? Priya asked. Luis turned to the final pages. They weren't listed as returns. Dana entered them as new training stock. The invoice numbers belonged to Vale Component Recovery. Priya photographed every page and had Luis sign a statement describing how the records were created. Do not take originals, she warned. Do not access anything outside your normal duties. Every step has to survive a hostile lawyer. Luis nodded. My wife says I should stay out of it. She may be right, I said. He looked toward the oncology wing. I trained 23 apprentices in that factory. If those parts hurt someone, staying out of it won't make me innocent. Back at Priya's office, we compared the manifests with warranty and production logs available through customer notices. One batch number became 4 became 19. By midnight, we had identified 67 Ellison safety timers containing components from the same suspicious production family. They had been shipped across 5 states, and one was already installed inside the sterilization system of the hospital where Luis's wife was being treated. For one terrible second, I pictured Luis's wife lying beneath hospital lights while a defective Ellison timer quietly counted too fast inside the walls. We contact the hospital now, I said. Priya closed the production list on her screen. We contact them carefully. There is no careful version of 11 missing minutes. There is if you want them to believe us. She called St. Joseph's facilities director from her office, identified herself as an independent medical device compliance consultant, and asked whether the sterilization system containing our timer could be taken out of service pending a precautionary inspection. She did not accuse Ellison Precision of fraud. She did not mention Mason, counterfeit components, or our investigation. She gave them the serial number and the documented results from St. Bridget's returned unit. The director agreed to isolate the system. Luis sat across from me, his hands clasped so tightly that the tendons stood out beneath his skin. My wife's surgery is tomorrow, he said. The unit won't be used, I told him. You're certain? No, Priya said before I could answer. We are never certain until the hospital confirms the lockout. Luis looked at her. She met his eyes without softening the truth. That is why we document every call. An hour later, the hospital sent written confirmation. The timer had been removed from service. A backup sterilizer would handle the next day's procedures. Luis read the email twice before his shoulders finally lowered. We had protected one hospital. 66 suspect units remained. The next morning, Mason announced the sale of Ellison Precision. He did it from a temporary stage, erected in the main assembly hall. Every shift had been ordered to attend. A large Northstar MedTech banner hung behind him beside our original brass logo. Kate stood on one side of the stage. Dana stood on the other. I was placed in the front row. Mason spoke about transformation, stability, and the future. He praised our employees for carrying a legacy into a modern healthcare economy. Then he introduced 3 Northstar executives and announced that the acquisition would close in 21 days. Applause moved through the hall in uneven waves. Some employees looked relieved, others looked toward me. Mason raised one hand. If the transaction closes on schedule, all active employees will receive a retention bonus. That produced louder applause. He had not merely created a deadline, he had attached hundreds of families to it. Any challenge I made would now appear to threaten their paychecks. Mason invited me onto the stage. I climbed the steps slowly, playing the role he expected. He placed an arm around my shoulders, while photographers gathered below us. Ruth built the foundation, he told the crowd. Northstar will give that foundation the scale it deserves. He handed me the microphone. I looked across the faces of machinists, inspectors, engineers, shipping clerks, and apprentices. Some had worked for us longer than Mason had known my daughter. Many were already calculating what the bonus could pay for. A medical bill, a mortgage payment, a child's tuition. I could have warned them. I could have said that 67 timers might contain counterfeit springs, that retirement deductions were already disappearing, and that the man beside me needed their applause more than their safety. But Priya's words remained with me. You have evidence of a defective device, not yet a complete case. I'm proud of the people who built this company, I said. And I hope every promise made to them is honored. Mason's hand tightened briefly against my shoulder. The audience heard a blessing. He heard a warning. Afterward, Kate found me near the tool room. You could have sounded happier. I said I was proud of the employees. You didn't say you supported the sale. Does North Star need my approval? Her eyes shifted away. Mom, this acquisition protects everyone. Orders have been uneven for 2 years. North Star gives us capital, distribution, and access to larger hospital networks. And what happens to production after closing? The Pennsylvania plant remains operational. That wasn't my question. Kate lowered her voice. There may be restructuring. How many people? No final decisions have been made. Mason answered the question that afternoon. He circulated a confidential transition chart to department heads. Luis obtained no copy, but one supervisor showed him the screen before the file was withdrawn. 48 positions were marked for elimination 30 days after the sale. Most belonged to experienced machinists, manual inspectors, and toolroom staff, the very people most capable of recognizing counterfeit components. Lewis's name was on the list, so was mine, though my role was described as ceremonial and unpaid. By evening, Priya and I were arguing in her office. We must notify the remaining hospitals, she said. With what? I asked. A list reconstructed from incomplete production families? With a documented failure pattern. If we alert them before we know which units are affected, Mason will recall the wrong batches, destroy the underlying records, and blame the old inventory system. Patients cannot wait for a perfect theory. I am not asking for perfection. You are asking for control. The word stopped me. She had used it deliberately. You think this is about my company. I think part of it is. I look through her office window at the dark parking lot. My name is on those timers. That is exactly why you should not decide alone. She was right again, and I resented her for the consistency of it. We agreed on a narrow course. Priya would prepare a confidential hazard notice for the state health department and the affected hospital networks. Before submission, we needed to confirm the full range of counterfeit batches and secure at least one more customer-returned unit through an independent channel. We gave ourselves 48 hours. Mason gave us less. The following morning, St. Agnes reported a second sterilization anomaly. The same timer model had released 8 minutes early during a routine equipment test. No patient exposure occurred, but the hospital's risk officer demanded a written explanation by the end of the week. Mason classified the report as a software synchronization error. Then he canceled our outside heat testing contract. By noon, Dana had ordered all customer-returned units transferred from the restoration annex to a secured warehouse controlled by the acquisition team. They were cleaning the table before we could count what had been placed on it. At 4:15, Emma sent me a photograph from inside the records corridor. 3 sealed cartons sat on a freight cart. Each bore a red label. Legasiwus, founder of Ocean only beneath the labels. In Dana's handwriting was a pickup order scheduled for 6 that evening. The destination line did not name a laboratory. It named an industrial shredding company. The shredding truck was due in less than 2 hours. I did not run toward the records corridor. I did not call security or accuse Dana of destroying evidence. That was what Mason expected from me now. Urgency mistaken for instability, anger displayed before witnesses, another action he could turn into a warning about my judgment. Instead, I called his office. I've been thinking about the anniversary speech, I said. I owe the employees more than a few careful sentences. There was a pause. What do you have in mind? A public apology. Mason came to the restoration room within 10 minutes. Kate followed him, carrying the expression of someone who had been summoned to witness a surrender she did not trust. I told them I wanted to address the afternoon shift before the North Star transition meetings began. I would acknowledge that my resistance had created fear, apologize for questioning the new production systems without complete information, and endorse Mason's leadership. Kate stared at me. "You would do that?" "I have spent my life telling people that precision requires correction. I should be willing to correct myself." Mason leaned against the bench. "What changed?" "The hospital reports frightened me," I said. "So did the sale." I reacted as though anything I did not understand must be dangerous. None of those words were false. The deception lay in what I allowed him to conclude. He glanced toward the glass cabinet where Daniel's old tools waited for the anniversary exhibit. "And you're comfortable supporting the acquisition?" "I'm comfortable supporting the employees." "That isn't the same thing. It is the sentence I can say honestly." He considered it, then nodded. The employee meeting began at 4:30 in the assembly hall. Mason stood behind the lectern, but he let me speak first. Nearly 200 employees faced me beneath the white industrial lights. Luis stood near the rear beside the night shift toolmakers. Emma remained close to the aisle, her engineering notebook against her chest. I had addressed that workforce during strikes, layoffs, funerals, expansions, and the morning after Daniel died. This was the first time I stood before them, pretending to be defeated. "I owe all of you an apology," I began. The room quieted. In recent weeks, I questioned decisions and procedures without having access to every fact. I allowed my fear of change to become distrust, and that created uncertainty in a company that already faces enough of it. Mason watched from 3 steps behind me. "I also failed to recognize how my actions could affect your retention bonuses and the future of this plant. Ellison Precision has never belonged to one person, no matter whose name is on the building." That sentence earned a few nods. I turned slightly toward Mason. "He has my support as president during this transition." Applause began near the office staff and spread across the hall. Mason stepped forward and embraced me, his hand pressed firmly between my shoulder blades while cameras captured the moment. "You did the right thing," he whispered. I smiled into the fabric of his suit. "I know." After the meeting, he restored my unrestricted access to the anniversary archive. The production floor ban remained, but I could review historical materials, customer artifacts, founder records, and anything designated for the gala exhibit. Exactly as I had hoped, at 5:20 I walked into the records corridor with Emma beside me. The 3 cartons marked Legacies still sat on the freight cart. A security guard was waiting to escort them to the loading dock. I placed my hand on the top box. "These require founder authorization." The guard checked the label. Dana said they were cleared for disposal. "She does not have founder authorization." He called Mason. I listened only to his side of the conversation. "Yes, sir, she's here now." "Yes, understood." The guard ended the call. "Mr. Vale says you may review them for the exhibit." The shredding order was cancelled. Emma and I wheeled the cartons into restoration and locked the door. I expected defective timers, inspection reports, perhaps the missing physical samples from line 17. The first box contained payroll reconciliation files. The second held employee benefit statements. The third contained correspondence from the company's retirement plan administrator. Emma lifted one folder. Why would Dana label these as customer returns? So nobody looking for financial records would open them. We began with the oldest documents. Every Ellison Precision employee contributed to a retirement plan through automatic payroll deductions. The company withheld the money from each paycheck, added an employer contribution, and was required to forward both amounts to the plan administrator. The pay statements showed the deductions clearly. The plan reports did not. For 6 consecutive pay periods, employee money had been removed from wages but deposited weeks late. Then the delays widened. 1 month became 2, 2 became nearly 4. The most recent report showed no deposit at all. Emma looked at the totals. Could this be an accounting error? Not across every employee. The missing amount was more than $1 million. Not company profit, not an executive bonus. Money taken directly from machinists, inspectors, clerks, and apprentices who believed it was being placed safely into their futures. I found a series of internal reconciliation forms signed by Dana. Each described the difference as a temporary administrative timing issue. Timing, they had even turned that word into a disguise. Emma sat down, slowly. My paycheck shows a deduction. Yes, so they took mine too. Her voice made the crime smaller and more terrible. Until then, the missing retirement funds had been a number. Now they were money removed from my granddaughter's first serious job, from Luisa's final working years, from employees who would never earn enough to replace what vanished. I photographed every page in order while Emma created an index. We did not remove originals. Priya had taught me that an angry truth without a clean chain of custody could be buried beneath procedure. Near the bottom of the third carton, I found the correspondence explaining why Dana had hidden the files. The retirement administrator had sent 3 formal warnings. The final letter stated that continued failure to transmit employee contributions would be reported to federal regulators. The response deadline was 2 days after the North Star acquisition. Mason intended to close the sale before anyone outside Ellison Precision understood the liability. Emma pulled the vendor incorporation record from my archive folder and placed it beside the first delayed deposit notice. "Grandma," she said, pointing to the dates, "Vail Component Recovery had been formed on March 14. The first retirement contribution failed to reach the plan on March 18. 4 days apart, the counterfeit parts operation and the missing employee money had not developed separately. They had begun together. The retirement files gave us motive, but not yet method. $1 million had vanished from employee accounts. At the same time, counterfeit components entered production. That told me the 2 crimes shared a clock. It did not tell me what each stolen dollar was buying. Priya arrived before sunrise with 2 banker's boxes and a portable scanner. Emma brought copies of the retirement records. I supplied vendor files, historical production costs, and every warranty notice I still possessed. We worked at Daniel's old dining table. It had once held family breakfasts and unpaid invoices. Now it held proof that my company had become a machine built to take money from the same people twice. Priya began with warranty claims. "Do not look for large numbers first," she said. "Look for repetition." That was watchmaker's advice, spoken in an auditor's language. Ellison Precision had always maintained a low failure rate. Timers returned for impact damage, corrosion, poor installation, or age. Those incidents followed no perfect pattern. The recent claims did. Most involved premature release under heat. Nearly all had been settled quickly. Instead of returning the devices to Ellison Precision for engineering review, Mason's office had routed the hospitals through an outside claims administrator called Meridian Technical Resolution. Emma searched the Pennsylvania corporate registry. Meridian had been formed 14 months earlier. Its mailing address was a suite in King of Prussia, shared by 6 other companies. Its listed manager was Elaine Porter. I knew the name. Elaine had worked with Mason at his old consulting firm. She had also attended his wedding to Kate. How much did Meridian receive? I asked. Emma totaled the payments. $840,000 for administering claims? Priya shook her head. For making them disappear quietly, Meridian reimbursed hospitals, arranged replacement units, and collected defective timers. The invoices described the work as customer retention services. The charges were high enough to be profitable and low enough to escape attention. Then we found where the replacement units came from. Vail Component Recovery invoiced Ellison Precision for remanufactured legacy assemblies. Those assemblies used blue counterfeit springs and were sold back to us at nearly 3 times the cost of genuine parts. I laid the invoices beside Luisa's disposal manifests. The pattern became visible. Ellison shipped rejected and excess components to Lancaster Alloy Recovery as scrap. Somewhere between our loading dock and the recycler, the valuable pieces disappeared. Vail then invoiced us for replacement assemblies. Meridian handled the failures caused by those replacements. Mason's network profited when the good parts left, when the bad parts returned, and again when the bad parts failed. "He is not cutting costs," I said. "He is manufacturing loss." Priya turned one manifest around. "Where do the genuine components go?" We did not have that answer until Emma found a customs reference attached to a freight invoice. The shipment description read Precision Regulator Hardware for Agricultural Machinery. The destination was an industrial broker in Rotterdam. Our medical-grade assemblies were being sold overseas under a false classification. The broker paid a premium. The money never appeared in Ellison Precision's revenue. It went to a Delaware account controlled by Vail Component Recovery. I had spent years worrying that Mason saw craftsmanship as obsolete. I had been wrong. He understood its value perfectly. He simply believed it belonged to him. By noon, Priya had built a flowchart. She placed no accusation on it that we could not support with a document. Genuine components left as scrap, cash from the overseas sale entered Vail, counterfeit assemblies returned at inflated prices. Defective units generated claims. Meridian collected fees to settle them before hospitals demanded formal investigations. Employee retirement contributions covered the cash shortage created by the false vendors. The company's books showed rising inventory, controlled warranty costs, and temporary benefit reconciliations. To an acquisition team reviewing summaries, Ellison Precision might appear strained but stable. The truth was the reverse. The company was being hollowed out and painted from the outside. Northstar will discover this after closing, Emma said. Not immediately, Priya replied. If Mason controls the first internal review, he can blame historical practices. Meaning me, I said. The missing punch, deadline 17 serial numbers, and founder codes on false calibration records were no longer separate curiosities. They were an escape route. Mason intended to sell Northstar, a company weakened by fraud, collect his bonus, then direct the eventual investigation toward the manual systems I created. I did not need to be charged for the strategy to work. I only needed to be old, defensive, and publicly associated with legacy parts. He had already prepared that image. Priya closed the folder. We need the acquisition representations. I don't have access to the contract, Kate does. Emma said. The room became quiet. Emma looked at her retirement statement. Her own deduction appeared among the missing deposits. My mother wouldn't knowingly steal from employees. I wanted to agree. Instead, I remembered Kate refusing to meet my eyes when Mason placed the certification papers on my bench. People do not always name the thing they are helping, I said. That afternoon, I asked Kate to meet me at a cafe near Buchanan Park. She arrived 10 minutes late and did not remove her coat. I have 20 minutes. I need to understand the retirement delays. Her face changed before she answered. Mason said there was a processing issue. The deposits are being reconciled for 4 months. Cash flow has been uneven. Employee deductions are not operating cash. I know that. Then why were they used as operating cash? Her fingers closed around the paper cup. You don't understand the pressure we were under. I understand that money was taken from people's checks. It was temporary. Did you authorize it? She stood so quickly the table shook. I am not discussing company finances with you while you are secretly building a case against my husband. I had not told her I was building anything. Kate realized her mistake at the same moment I did. She reached for her bag. A folder slipped out and struck the floor. Several pages scattered beneath the table. I bent to help her. The top page was a bridge financing authorization, transferring withheld retirement funds into Ellison Precision's acquisition reserve. At the bottom was Kate's signature, not copied, not forged, hers. Kate snatched the bridge financing authorization from my hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, cups struck saucers, milk hissed beneath a steam wand, and 2 college students laughed near the window. Ordinary sounds continued, while the meaning of her signature settled between us. You should not have seen that, she said. You dropped it. That does not make it yours. No, the money taken from our employees makes it my concern. She gathered the remaining pages and shoved them into the folder. Her fingers moved too quickly, bending one corner. I told you the deposits were delayed. This says they were transferred into an acquisition reserve. Temporarily, you signed permission to use retirement deductions to support the sale. I signed an internal bridge authorization. Those are different words for the same act. Kate looked around the cafe. Not here. She walked out before I answered. I followed her 2 blocks to Buchanan Park. The afternoon had turned cool, and fallen leaves scraped across the walkway in dry circles. Kate stopped beside an empty baseball field and faced me. You have no idea what was happening when I signed that. Then tell me. The bank was threatening to reduce our credit line. 2 hospital systems delayed payment. Mason said we would miss payroll if we did not strengthen the operating account before the acquisition review. Employee retirement money does not belong in an operating account. I know that now, you knew it then. She flinched. That was the cruelty of truth. It could be accurate and still be used without mercy. Kate crossed her arms tightly. Mason said the deposits would be restored within 10 days. He showed me the North Star schedule. The initial acquisition payment was supposed to cover everything. And when 10 days passed, he said North Star requested more documentation. When a month passed, he said the buyer had changed counsel. When 4 months passed, her mouth trembled. I stopped asking him. The wind lifted her hair across her face. She did not brush it away. Why? Because every answer became a fight. Because he said I was panicking the way you always did when the company changed. Because he said if I undermined him in front of the board, the sale would collapse and hundreds of people would blame me. He made you responsible for the consequences of his decisions. You did that too. The words landed with no warning. Kate looked toward the empty bleachers. When I was a child, every factory problem became something I had to understand. You missed my debate final because a spring shipment was wrong, and then you explained why the factory would have suffered if you left. I know, no, you remember, that is not the same thing. I had prepared myself for evidence, lies, and legal documents. I had not prepared for the possibility that Mason's most effective weapon was a wound I had given him. Kate continued, you always made sacrifice sound noble when you were the one choosing it. Everyone else was expected to accept the cost. I was trying to keep the company alive, and Mason said exactly the same thing. There was no defense that would not prove her point. I failed you, I said. She looked at me then. I loved you. I still failed you. Her face tightened as though the admission hurt more than an argument. I am not asking you to forgive me today, I continued. But Mason is using our history to keep you from looking at what he has done. You think everything is manipulation. No, I think some of it is fear, some is shame, and some is a choice you made. She looked away again. I lowered my voice. Did you know about veil component recovery? No, Meridian Technical Resolution. I saw the name in claim summaries. Mason said North Star required outside administration. Did you know genuine components were being sold overseas? Her eyes returned to mine. What? That reaction was not practiced. Did you know defective substitutes were entering production? No. Did you authorize the false calibration reports? No. Did you know employee deductions were funding a company connected to Mason's former partner? No. Each answer came faster than the last, not because she was lying, but because the questions were revealing how much she had chosen not to know. I did not mention the laboratory test, Luis's manifests, Dana's right-handed watch, or the 67 suspect units. Kate was frightened enough to warn Mason. I needed to know whether there was still a part of her capable of stepping away from him. Help me stop the sale, I said. She shook her head immediately. I cannot, or will not. If I accuse Mason now and you are wrong, my marriage is over. Emma loses her father, the employees lose their bonuses, North Star walks away. And if I am right? Her silence answered, you have documents, I said. The acquisition contract, the disclosure schedules, the bridge agreements. I will not steal company records for you. I am not asking you to steal anything. You are asking me to testify against my husband. I am asking you to decide how much truth you can survive. Kate pressed both hands against her temples. He said you would do this. What? Make me choose between my family and the company. Mason is not your entire family. He is my husband, and Emma is an employee whose retirement deduction disappeared. Kate's hands dropped. The words had reached the place my accusations could not. She opened the folder and removed a thick packet held together by a black binder clip. I cannot give you the electronic files, she said. Access is logged. I did not move. This is a printed draft of the bridge financing package and seller certifications. Mason gave it to me before North Star revised the closing schedule. Why did you keep it? Because he asked me to shred it. She held the packet out. If anyone asks, you never received this from me. I accepted it. I will not promise that. Her eyes filled with anger again. Then give it back. No. We stood facing each other until she turned and walked away. That evening, Priya and I reviewed the packet page by page. It contained the acquisition conditions, disclosure obligations, bonus calculations, and representations required from the selling executives. Most of the language was dense but ordinary. Then Priya stopped at a section marked Personal Certification of President Mason was required to confirm under his own signature that no known product defect had been withheld. No undisclosed relationship existed with any material vendor. All employee retirement contributions were current. No officer had altered quality control records. If any statement proved false, Northstar could cancel the acquisition, recover its costs, and refer the matter for civil or criminal investigation. At the bottom of the compensation schedule was Mason's reward for signing. $4 million, payable immediately after closing. Priya tapped the page. This is why he needs the sale. I read the certification again. Mason had spent months hiding behind Dana, digital systems, and my founder codes. But to receive his money, he had to place his own name beneath every lie. Mason's $4 million bonus gave us leverage, but leverage is not victory. A certification becomes evidence only if the person signing it understands what he is claiming and has a clear opportunity to correct the record. Priya reminded me of that before I could turn the document into a weapon. We do not trick him into lying, she said. We document that he knows the truth and chooses to lie anyway. That distinction mattered. Mason had built his scheme by making every error look temporary, accidental, or inherited. To stop him, we needed more than proof of defective springs. We needed to connect the parts, the missing retirement money, the false records, and the acquisition statements, without leaving him room to call the pattern coincidence. Priya brought in an employee benefits attorney named Benjamin Cole. He was 58, compact and precise in the way he placed his briefcase square with the table. He reviewed the payroll deductions and plan statements inside Priya's office. These funds should have been transmitted promptly, he said. Using employee contributions as bridge financing creates personal exposure for anyone who authorized it. Can we restore the money before the sale? I asked. Not without access to company accounts can we force Mason to restore it. Eventually, but if you confront him today, he may manufacture deposits, alter the explanation, or claim the shortfall was discovered internally. Priya nodded. We preserve first. Benjamin prepared a confidential submission to the regional office responsible for employee benefit enforcement. We included copies, not originals, and a sworn statement explaining how the documents had been found among archive materials, scheduled for destruction. He did not promise agents would appear at the gala. He promised the complaint would exist before Mason signed. That was enough. The product evidence required equal care. Dr. Reed repeated the heat test on the Saint, Bridget's timer with a second technician present. The result differed by less than 4 seconds. The unit again released more than 11 minutes early. Priya sealed the spring, timer housing, and laboratory report in separate evidence bags. Each seal was signed, dated, and photographed. Luis supplied fresh copies of the disposal manifests from records he was authorized to maintain. Priya visited the tool room during his regular shift and watched him retrieve them from the plant system. Emma documented the impossible calibration timestamps. She compared badge logs, delivery receipts, and testing records for 12 suspect batches. In 7 cases, the system claimed the components completed heat testing before the supplier's truck entered our loading yard. A timer cannot be tested before it arrives, she said. People use software to make the impossible look organized. She created a timeline with source references beside every entry. No accusations, just dates that could not coexist honestly. My task was mechanical. Using units lawfully sent to the anniversary archive, I selected 3 examples for a live demonstration. One was a genuine Ellison mechanism built before Mason's supplier change. One contained the counterfeit blue spring. The third was the sealed hospital return. Emma designed clear, protective housings so an audience could see the balance wheels move without touching the mechanisms. We linked each timer to an independent reference clock. What exactly are we doing with these? She asked, showing the difference between a claim and a measurement. That is not a plan. It is the part you need. She frowned, but accepted the boundary. I was learning that secrecy could become another form of control. Emma deserved enough truth to make an informed choice, but not details that could endanger her if Mason questioned her. The buyer presented a different problem. If we warned North Star openly, its lawyers might suspend the acquisition immediately. Mason would know the evidence existed and begin destroying records. If we said nothing, the buyer could claim it had been ambushed. Benjamin knew a merger's attorney who had worked across from North Star's lead counsel. Through that channel, he sent a carefully worded notice. Material issues concerning product safety, vendor conflicts, and employee benefit obligations may require supplemental disclosure before any seller certification is accepted. No names, no attachments, no demand to cancel the transaction. Only a warning that the closing documents should not be signed without asking one more question. North Star's counsel acknowledged receipt, then the silence began. For 6 days, Mason behaved like a man whose future had become inevitable. He increased security around quality control. Dana ordered old files boxed for off-site storage. Grant Sutter stopped taking my calls. The anniversary staff installed banners across Conestoga Foundry Hall and built a raised platform for speeches. I continued rehearsing Mason's approved tribute. I praised innovation. I thanked North Star. I described myself as grateful to watch a new generation lead. Each time I read the words, Mason relaxed a little more. Kate avoided me. She attended meetings, signed routine reports, and left through a private entrance. I did not know whether she regretted giving me the bridge packet or had warned Mason. The uncertainty hurt, but it also protected us. If I could not read my daughter, neither could he. 2 weeks before the scheduled closing, Priya received confirmation that the benefits complaint had been assigned for preliminary review. The State Health Department accepted her confidential hazard notice and requested the serial ranges. We had begun moving the legal gears. None turned quickly enough for my liking. Then Mason changed the clock. He summoned me to the assembly hall, where workers were testing the anniversary lights. On stage, a long walnut table stood beneath the company logo. The North Star board wants a stronger public moment, he said. We're moving the final signing to the gala. I looked at the table in front of the employees and the press. It shows confidence. What about the closing scheduled for the following week? Accelerated. We sign at 8:30 during the anniversary program. Funds released that afternoon. My plan had depended on a private closing conference where North Star's counsel could question him before the signatures were complete. Mason had moved everything 5 days earlier and placed it beneath cameras. He mistook spectacle for protection. I looked toward the raised platform, the anniversary clock display, and the empty space where Emma's transparent test housings would stand. When do you want my ceremonial signature? I asked. Mason smiled. Right before mine. Mason's decision to place my ceremonial signature immediately before his changed the order of our trap. It also gave him more reason to watch me. The next morning, a red security seal on the archive cabinet had been cut and replaced. The difference was almost invisible. The new strip matched the old color, but the adhesive had been pressed down from right to left. Emma always sealed cabinets from left to right. Someone had entered after us. Before I could inspect the contents, the restoration room door opened. Mason stood there with Dana and the head of security. Step away from the cabinet, he said. I did. Donna held a clipboard against her chest. Her watch rested on her right wrist, its silver face catching the inspection lamp. Mason looked at Emma. When did you last open that cabinet? Yesterday at 4:20. Was anyone with you? My grandmother. What did you remove? 2 regulator drawings, the founder's speech binder, and the transparent housings for the gala demonstration. Dana said payroll documents were stored in that cabinet. Emma looked at me. They were not on the inventory. They were confidential financial records, Dana replied. They should never have been here at all. That was true, though not for the reason she intended. Mason stepped closer to the cabinet. 3 boxes of retirement plan files disappeared after Ruth was granted archive access. Now the cabinet seal has been disturbed again. The files did not disappear, I said. They were scheduled for destruction. Dana's face remained still. How would you know that? I had spoken 1 sentence too far. Emma glanced toward me, waiting. I could have denied seeing the shredding order. I could have accused Dana of hiding the files. Either response would reveal that we had examined them carefully enough to understand their value. So I bent down and picked up a brass gear from the workbench. I may be mistaken, Mason studied me. About what? The boxes. I turned the gear between my fingers. I thought they were customer returns. The labels said founder authorization. Dana said, that does not explain where they went. I moved them. Emma's head turned sharply. I continued before she could speak. I wanted room for the anniversary pieces. I may have placed the boxes in another storage cabinet. Which cabinet? Mason asked. I looked around the room as if searching my memory. I don't recall. The silence lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. Mason's expression softened, not with sympathy, with satisfaction. Ruth, he said, did you take financial records out of this building? No. Did you photograph them? I photographed many archive items. That was not my question. I let my eyes move toward Daniel's regulator drawings, then back to him. I'm sorry, what did you ask? Emma inhaled quietly. Mason looked at Dana. Search the archive, review every access log. No one leaves with documents, drives, or photography equipment. The security chief began inspecting cabinets. Dana opened the drawer containing the gala demonstration parts. She lifted the clear housing, holding the antique anniversary watch I had been restoring. Inside it, beside Daniel's original brass wheel, lay one blue counterfeit spring. I had placed it there deliberately the night before. Dana held it up. What is this? I frowned at the spring. That belongs in the hospital return mechanism. It is inside a 70-year-old watch. I must have mixed the trays. Emma stared at me. She knew I could identify springs by touch in darkness. She also understood enough not to correct me. Mason took the watch from Dana and examined it. You installed a modern production spring in an antique movement? It appears so. Could this have damaged the mechanism? Yes. He handed it back slowly. The evidence of my supposed confusion was exactly what he wanted. A technical mistake, visible to witnesses, made by a woman who had recently accused others of falsifying production. He no longer needed to prove I had stolen payroll files. He only needed to believe he understood me. I think you should stop handling the gala mechanisms, he said. Emma can finish the display. I would prefer to complete Daniel's watch. This is not a punishment. It is a precaution. There was that word again. I lowered my eyes. All right, Mason relaxed. He instructed security to continue the records search, but canceled a full forensic review of the restoration room. The false spring had answered the question he cared about most. Ruth Ellison was slipping. As soon as they left, Emma locked the door. You did not mix those trays. No, you wanted him to find it. Yes, her voice dropped. You made yourself look confused. I made him see what he was already hoping to see. What if he uses it to remove you from the gala? He needs me on stage, and if he decides he does not, then we adapt. Emma turned away, angry. At what point were you planning to tell me that I was helping you fake mistakes? You were safer not knowing. That sounds like something Mom would say. The comparison stung because she was right. I'm sorry, I said. You deserved a choice. She looked back at me. Then give me one now. I told her enough. Not every document or legal contact, but the shape of the plan. Mason had to sign first. North Star had been warned. Priya would present the laboratory evidence. The benefit complaint already existed. Emma's timeline would establish that the tests were fabricated before the parts arrived. When I finished, she was pale. You think Dad knows people could get hurt. I think he knows enough to be responsible for what he is hiding. That was not what I asked. No, I said. I do not yet know what he tells himself. Before Emma could answer, my phone rang. Lewis, his voice was strained. They fired me. What happened? Dana said I violated vendor confidentiality by copying disposal manifests. Security walked me out in front of the night shift. Where are the originals? In my truck. I kept them separate from the copies. Do not go home. Meet Priya at her office. I'm already on my way. The line went dead. 40 minutes later, Priya called. Lewis had arrived. But the envelope was gone. Someone had forced the lock on his truck in the employee parking lot. Nothing else had been taken. Not his tools, cash, or phone charger. Only the original disposal manifests. Then Priya told me what security had left behind on the passenger seat. A single blue regulator spring, stamped with a triangle. The blue spring on Luis's passenger seat was not a warning meant to frighten him. It was a message meant for me. Whoever broke into his truck knew what we had found, knew the triangular mark mattered. and knew Luis had spoken to someone outside the factory. Mason's circle was no longer merely hiding records. It was watching the people who might preserve them. Priya placed the spring in an evidence bag. "We report the break-in," she said. "Luis will lose any chance of returning to work. He has already been fired. He could still be accused of stealing the manifests." "He may be accused either way." Luis sat beside her desk, his face gray with exhaustion. His wife's surgery had gone well, but he had spent the night moving between her hospital room and the police station. "I'll make the report," he said. "If I stay quiet now, they'll know the threat worked." That was his choice, not mine. I was finally learning the difference. The police photographed the damaged lock and accepted the spring as possible evidence. They did not declare it corporate intimidation or connect it to Mason. A broken truck in an employee parking lot was still only a broken truck until the larger case could be shown. We no longer had time to wait for every part to align. At 9 the following morning, St. Agnes Medical Center sent Ellison Precision a formal safety demand. Its second timer had released early during verification testing. The hospital network wanted to know whether similar units were defective and whether a recall was required. The deadline was 48 hours. If the company failed to respond, St. Agnes would notify every member hospital in its purchasing group and submit the incident directly to state regulators. Mason called an emergency executive meeting. I was not invited, but the glass walls of the conference room revealed enough. Dana spoke rapidly while Grant Sutter scrolled through production files. Kate sat at the far end of the table with both hands around a cup she never lifted. Mason entered the restoration room after noon. "The gala is moving to Thursday." I looked at the calendar. That is 5 days earlier. North Star's board approved an accelerated closing. The St. Agnes issue is creating unnecessary uncertainty. We need to complete the transaction before rumors damage employee confidence. Does North Star know about the second failure? Our quality team has classified it as a hospital maintenance issue. Without examining the unit, Mason's jaw shifted. The hospital ran the wrong verification procedure, did they? "This is why you are not part of quality review anymore." He placed a revised program on my bench. The acquisition signing would occur at 8:30 Thursday evening, immediately after my founder tribute. Less than 60 hours away, the benefits investigator Benjamin had contacted could not attend. She was in Cleveland on another case and had not yet obtained authority to subpoena Ellison Precision's accounts. Priya's health department notice was under review, not yet active. Lewis's original manifests were gone. Our plan had been built around time Mason had just removed. "Where is Kate?" I asked. His answer came too quickly. "Resting. She was here this morning. She had a panic episode after the hospital letter. I sent her to the lake house for a few days. The cottage belonged to Kate now, though Daniel and I had purchased it before she was born. It sat 40 miles north, surrounded by enough trees to make isolation look peaceful. Did she want to go? She needs space from you and from this company. Does she have her phone?" Mason smiled without warmth. "My wife's health is not another investigation for you." He left the revised program on the bench. Emma arrived 20 minutes later, moving quickly enough to attract attention. "Mom didn't go willingly," she said. "How do you know?" "She texted me from the car. She said Dad took her laptop because North Star's lawyers needed it." "Can you reach her now?" "Her phone is off." Emma opened her engineering notebook. Inside was a brass locker key taped beneath the cover. "She gave me this last week." The key belonged to an old drafting cabinet in the mezzanine archive. Kate had once used it for paper budget files before Mason converted finance to digital storage. We entered separately. The cabinet contained obsolete tax manuals, expense ledgers, and a row of empty binders. Behind them, Emma found a small black thumb drive taped beneath the top shelf. A folded note was wrapped around it. "For Emma, if I become too afraid to tell the truth." My granddaughter read the sentence twice, then she handed the drive to me. We did not open it inside the factory. Priya's office computer remained disconnected from Ellison systems. Before examining the files, she created a forensic copy and recorded the drive's condition. The first folders contained bridge financing drafts, retirement plan correspondence, and email exports Kate had already shown us in part. The final folder was labeled Review Footage, Do not delete. A video opened from a quality review session 6 months earlier. The camera had been positioned above a work table during an ordinary factory process audit. Dana stood beneath it, sorting calibration labels beside several blue spring assemblies. The image was clear enough to show serial numbers. She peeled one label from a failed unit and replaced it with another carrying a Founder-era production code. Then Mason's voice came from outside the frame. Make sure every legacy batch stays under Ruth's authorization family. Dana looked toward him. What if Northstar traces the dates? They won't go past the digital certification. And if the hospitals do? A pause. By then, the sale will be closed. Dana pressed the new label into place, Mason continued. His voice calm. Do not remove the founder codes. If this breaks later, the record has to end with her. Emma stopped the video. Her face had gone completely still. Until that moment, she had been helping expose faulty systems and suspicious records. Now she had heard her father plan to sacrifice her grandmother by name. Then the screen flickered. A second video file appeared beneath the first. Its timestamp was from the morning of the Cell 6 shutdown. The preview image showed Dana standing in front of a mirror. She was wearing my gray shop coat. The second video gave us what we had lacked from the beginning. It did not merely suggest that Dana had used my badge or borrowed my coat. It showed her preparing the disguise before the Cell 6 shutdown. The date, time, and camera source matched the factory system. Mason's voice appeared in the same review archive, ordering her to preserve my founder codes on defective batches. Priya copied both files onto 3 encrypted drives. Benjamin transmitted one to the benefits investigator with an updated statement. A second went to Northstar's lead counsel through the attorney who had delivered our original warning. The third remained sealed in Priya's safe. We did not send the videos to reporters. We did not confront Mason. By Thursday afternoon, Conestoga Foundry Hall had been transformed into a monument to his victory. White banners hung between the old iron columns. Photographs from Ellison Precision's history rotated across tall digital screens. Glass cases displayed Daniel's first gear cutters, my original railroad chronometer, and the brass regulator that had secured our first hospital contract. Each object was labeled with a date and a paragraph about the past. Mason had arranged the room so that everything connected to me appeared finished. My place was on a raised platform beside the anniversary exhibit, not at the signing table. A narrow spotlight illuminated my chair. Behind it stood the enlargement of the photograph taken in our first workshop. The young woman with polishing compound on her hands and no idea what her ambition would cost her daughter. Emma helped fasten the microphone beneath my collar. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," she waited. "That does not mean I am unprepared." Across the hall, Mason greeted local officials and Northstar executives as though he already owned the future. He wore a midnight blue suit and the Ellison anniversary watch on his left wrist. The watch had not been part of the approved exhibit. Through its transparent back, I could see the blue regulator spring and the tiny triangular punch near the inner coil. Mason had placed evidence against himself on his own body because he believed it was jewelry. Kate was absent. Her name remained printed on the program as Chief Financial Officer, but Mason told anyone who asked that she was recovering from exhaustion. Emma had reached her once from a borrowed phone. Kate said she was safe at the cottage and would come when she was ready. I did not know whether that meant before the signing or after everything was over. At 7:30, the hall filled with employees and their families. Luis entered through a side door wearing his only dark suit. Priya sat beside him with Dr. Reed and Benjamin Cole, Northstar's counsel. Amelia Hart occupied the front table with 2 members of the acquisition committee. She did not look toward me. That was part of the plan. My son opened the program with a film about modernization. It showed automated assembly arms, clean digital dashboards, and smiling apprentices wearing new uniforms. There was no footage of the midnight scrap van, the sealed payroll boxes, or the hospitals waiting for an honest answer. Then my face appeared on the screen. In the recorded interview, I said, "A company survives when each generation improves what it inherits." Mason had cut the sentence before my next words. Improvement begins with telling the truth about what is broken. The audience applauded the version he preferred. He invited Emma onto the stage to present the anniversary watch. She stood beside him, pale but composed, and described it as a modern adaptation of my first regulator design. Built from legacy principles, Mason said, lifting his wrist, but engineered for the future. His hand rested over the counterfeit spring. Emma's eyes met mine for 1 second. She had done her part. The watch was now publicly identified as a current Ellison product connected directly to Mason. The speeches continued. North Star's regional president praised the acquisition. A county commissioner congratulated Mason for protecting manufacturing jobs. Dana described the company's quality systems as fully traceable from supplier to final calibration. Lewis's mouth tightened, but he remained seated. At 8:12, Mason came to my chair. "Ready?" he asked. "For the tribute?" "For your final act as controlling founder." He spoke softly enough that the nearby guests could not hear. "You look tired, Ruth. Read the statement, sign the foundation page, and let the rest of us carry the weight." I looked at the anniversary watch. It had gained nearly 2 minutes since Emma presented it. "I've carried worse." His smile thinned. He offered his arm as the photographer approached. I took it. The room rose in applause while he escorted me to the walnut signing table. The ceremonial document waited beneath a gold pen. It transferred no actual shares that evening, but it authorized the future creation of the Ellison Modernization Foundation and declared my public support for the transaction. Mason leaned close. "Just make the mark. I signed Ruth Ellison beneath my signature." Where the document invited an optional founder's message, I added 1 sentence. "Subject to complete disclosure of all material safety and employee benefit liabilities." Mason did not read it. He was already turning toward the cameras. The audience applauded again. He helped me return to my chair, then took his place at the center of the table. Amelia Hart opened the final acquisition packet. She reviewed the seller certification aloud. Mason confirmed that all product defects had been disclosed. He confirmed that no officer held an undisclosed interest in a material vendor. He confirmed that employee retirement contributions were current and that no quality record had been altered. Each answer was clear. Yes, yes, yes. Dana stood behind him, perfectly still. Mason signed his name beneath the certification. He pressed hard enough for the pen to leave an impression on the pages below. The document was witnessed, dated, and passed to Amelia. The $4 million bonus agreement waited in the next folder. Mason looked toward the North Star executives with the satisfaction of a man hearing the final click of a lock. Amelia examined his signature. Then she looked at the sentence I had written beneath mine. She closed the acquisition packet. North Star's president leaned toward her, confused. Mason's smile faltered. Amelia stood and faced the audience. "Before North Star executes its signature," she said, "we have one final presentation to review." She turned toward my chair. "Mrs. Ellison, would you please come to the stage?" The walk from my chair to the center of the stage was less than 20 feet. It felt longer than the 41 years between my first rented workbench and that signing table. Mason stood as I approached. "What presentation?" he asked Amelia Hart. She did not answer him. North Star's counsel simply moved the unsigned acquisition packet away from his hand and placed it beneath her own. I looked toward Emma. She crossed to the anniversary exhibit and rolled out a narrow steel cart carrying 3 transparent housings. Inside the first sat a genuine Ellison regulator built 12 years earlier. The second contained a current production mechanism taken through the anniversary archive. The third held the sealed timer returned by St. Bridget's Hospital. Each was connected to an independent reference clock. Mason's voice hardened. "This was not approved for the program." "No," I said. "It was approved for the exhibit." The distinction drew a few uneasy murmurs from the audience. Emma positioned the reference clock where everyone could see its digital display. Behind us, the large screen changed from the acquisition logo to a magnified live image of the 3 balance wheels. I took the microphone. For most of my life, I have worked with mechanisms that control dangerous intervals. A hospital sterilizer does not care about confidence, titles, or press releases. It cares whether 60 minutes are truly 60 minutes. Mason stepped toward Amelia. "This is a personal demonstration by a suspended former technician. It has no relevance to the transaction." Priya rose from the front row. It has been independently tested and documented. She walked onto the stage carrying a sealed evidence case. Dr. Reed followed with laboratory reports bearing his signature and certification number. Dana moved toward the side exit. 2 North Star security officers quietly blocked the aisle. No one touched her. They simply made it clear that leaving would be noticed. Priya addressed the room. The hospital return timer was tested twice under controlled conditions. In both tests, it released more than 11 minutes before completion of a simulated sterilization cycle. The screen displayed the laboratory recording. The reference clock reached 60 minutes. The hospital timer stopped at 48 minutes and 48 seconds. A sound passed through the hall. Not a gasp exactly, but the collective loss of certainty. Mason lifted both hands. One damaged return proves nothing. Hospitals mishandle equipment every day. That is why there are 3 mechanisms. I said. Emma activated the genuine Ellison timer and the current production unit. For the first minute, both appeared steady. At 30 seconds, the blue spring mechanism began creeping ahead. At 60 honest seconds, it had gained nearly 4. The genuine timer remained aligned with the reference clock. I asked Mason to lift his wrist. He stared at me. The anniversary watch, I said. You called it a modern Ellison product in front of these witnesses. This is absurd. Then show them that it keeps time. Every camera in the hall turned toward him. Refusing would look worse than complying. Mason understood spectacle too well to escape it. He removed the watch and placed it beneath the overhead camera. Emma aligned it with the reference clock. The second hand advanced too quickly. The same nervous jump I had seen when he told me to make the mark. Priya opened the evidence case and displayed enlarged microscopic images. On every counterfeit spring, near the inner coil, was the triangular punch. The tested components contain a lower-grade steel alloy, she said. Under heat, their tension changes predictably. The defect is not random and it is not caused by shipping. Dr. Reed confirmed the findings and explained that the spring geometry showed deliberate manufacture, not accidental contamination. Emma then projected her timeline. 7 batches had digital heat test approvals, dated before the supplier's truck entered our loading yard. 1 unit had supposedly completed testing before the production line began operating. A timer cannot be calibrated before it arrives, she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. The timestamps were generated after the fact. Mason turned toward the audience. My daughter is a student. She does not understand enterprise software. I understand arrival times. Emma replied. He ignored her. This entire performance was constructed by Ruth using legacy components under her personal control. She had access to the archive, the old punch tools, and the founder coding system. She has been trying to sabotage this acquisition since the day it was announced. There it was, the defense he had prepared before any accusation reached him. He pointed toward me. She removed sealed material. She mishandled production parts. She was recorded entering a restricted safety cell with her badge. Now she brings antique mechanisms onto a stage and calls them evidence. I let him finish. A person winding his own trap should not be interrupted. Amelia opened the acquisition packet again. Mr. Vale, moments ago you certified that no quality records had been altered and no known product defect had been withheld. Are you withdrawing that certification? His face tightened. No, I am stating that any irregularity originated under Ruth's legacy system. Then you maintain that your certification is accurate? Yes. The answer was recorded by every microphone in the room. Lewis rose from his seat. He identified the missing scrap shipments, the returned containers, and Dana's midnight authorizations. Priya displayed the duplicate manifests preserved before his truck was broken into. Mason called him a disgruntled former employee. Then Emma played the first video from Kate's thumb drive. On the screen, Dana replaced a calibration label with one carrying my founder code. Mason's voice filled the hall. Do not remove the founder codes. If this breaks later, the record has to end with her. For the first time that evening, Mason had no immediate reply. Dana sank into the nearest chair. The rear doors opened. Kate stood there, holding the original bridge financing packets against her chest. Her face was pale, but she walked forward without looking at Mason. Some of those signatures are mine, she said. But the instructions came from my husband. Kate's footsteps were the only sound in the hall. She walked past the employees, the North Star executives, and the photographs of our family projected across the walls. Mason turned toward her as though the correct expression could still stop what was happening. Concern first, then disbelief, finally anger. "Kate," he said softly, "you're exhausted. You should not be here." She climbed the stage and placed the bridge financing packets on the signing table. "These are the original drafts," she told Amelia Hart. "Not the revised copies sent to North Star." Mason reached for them. Amelia covered the documents with one hand. "Do not touch anything on this table." The quiet command changed the room. Mason was no longer the host of an interrupted celebration. He was a man standing beside evidence other people controlled. Kate opened the first packet. "My signature is on the authorization that delayed employee retirement deposits," she said. "I approved it because Mason told me the company would miss payroll and collapse before the acquisition." Louis stared at her from the front row. Kate met his eyes. "I knew the deductions were not being deposited on time. I told myself it was temporary. I was wrong, and I am responsible for signing." Mason stepped forward. "You are not responsible for anything. You were under extreme pressure. Pressure from you. I was trying to save the company. You were trying to save your bonus." She handed Amelia an email in which Mason ordered her to classify the withheld contributions as an acquisition liquidity adjustment and delay notifying the plan administrator until after closing. He never wrote steal or hide. He wrote delay, bridge, reconcile, and protect, words chosen to make wrongdoing sound temporary. Mason looked toward the audience. "My wife is emotionally unstable. Ruth has been manipulating her." Kate flinched but did not retreat. "You took my laptop," she said. "You sent me to the cottage because you knew I kept the drafts. I sent you there because you were having panic attacks. You threatened to use them against me in a custody hearing." Emma stood beside the test housings. "Dad?" Mason did not look at her. Kate's voice weakened. "He said that if I interfered with the sale, he would tell a court I was incapable of caring for Emma. He kept records of every counseling appointment and every medication I took after Daniel died. I had not known money could be counted. Threats inside a marriage accumulated quietly, each one designed to make the victim doubt whether it was serious enough to name. He said Ruth would take the company, the house, and my daughter," Kate continued. "He said nobody would believe I had not helped him." Mason laughed sharply. "This is absurd. Dana handled vendor compliance. Kate handled finance. If there were errors, they occurred in their departments." Dana looked up from her chair. "You told me the same thing," she said. Mason turned on her. "Be very careful." That warning finished what the evidence had begun. Dana stood, her hands trembling around her tablet. "Mason created veil component recovery with Nathan Cole," she said. "He promised me the chief operating position after North Star closed. My debts would be paid from the consulting fee." "What debts?" Amelia asked. "My husband's failed restaurant, tax liens, credit cards." Mason pointed at her. "She is admitting she falsified records." "Yes," Dana said, "because you instructed me to." She described the system. Rejected components left through Lancaster alloy recovery. Usable pieces were separated and sold overseas. Counterfeit springs returned through Vail. Dana replaced calibration labels and assigned founder-era serial families. She used my badge during the Cell 6 shutdown and wore my coat to create a believable silhouette. The right-handed watch had been the flaw she never considered. Luis's manifests were taken by a private security contractor hired through Meridian. Dana arranged access to the employee lot. The blue spring left in his truck was Mason's idea. He said fear would make Luis protect his family, she whispered. Luis remained standing. It almost did. Mason moved toward the stage exit. 2 North Star security officers stepped into his path. "You cannot detain me," he said. "This is my company. It is not North Star's company," Amelia replied. "And the transaction has not closed." He looked at me. Everything polished had fallen away. I saw a frightened gambler who had mistaken control over other people for competence. "You did this," he said. "No," I answered. "I measured it. You turned them against me. I gave them somewhere to stand when they stopped lying for you." His face reddened. "The founder codes are on every batch," Ruth trained Dana. "There is no proof I knew defective parts entered production." Emma touched the control pad. The second video began. Dana stood before a mirror, wearing my gray coat. She adjusted the right sleeve, lifted my stolen badge, and left the frame. Then the image changed to a conference recording from the same morning. Mason sat with Dana. "Cell 6 does not have to fail completely," he said. "It only has to look as though Ruth tried to prove something." Dana asked what would happen if an employee was injured. "Then make sure no one is standing close." A woman in the audience began to cry. Her husband worked in Cell 6. Mason stopped denying and turned toward the exit. Uniformed state investigators entered through the rear doors with representatives from the Employee Benefits Office. They carried preservation orders, interview notices, and authority to secure company records before anything could be removed. The lead investigator examined Mason's certification. "You were notified tonight of the defects, vendor relationships, and missing retirement contributions," she said. "You were then asked whether your representations remained accurate." Mason said nothing. She placed the signed certificate inside a clear evidence sleeve. "Whatever occurred before tonight requires investigation," she said. "But this signature is different." She sealed the sleeve. "You made these representations personally after being given the opportunity to correct them. That may constitute a new and separate act of acquisition fraud." The investigators did not handcuff Mason on the stage. Real consequences rarely arrive with the timing of applause. They separated him from Dana, collected their phones, and instructed everyone at the signing table not to leave until initial statements were taken. North Star's security officers sealed the acquisition documents. State investigators secured the quality offices, server room, and records annex, while a federal benefits specialist photographed the retirement files exactly where they were found. Mason kept demanding his lawyer. That was the first sensible thing he had done all evening. He stood beside the walnut table while employees filed out beneath the old iron rafters. No one approached him. The people who had applauded his promises 40 minutes earlier would not meet his eyes. His power did not disappear when investigators entered. It disappeared when everyone stopped pretending to believe him. North Star suspended the acquisition before midnight. The following morning, its board formally withdrew and demanded reimbursement for due diligence costs under the seller certification provisions Mason had signed. His $4 million bonus vanished before it existed. Ellison Precision's board placed him, Kate, and Dana on administrative leave. An independent director took temporary control. I was offered the position. I refused. The company did not need another Ellison making decisions before the evidence was counted. Within 72 hours, Priya's hazard notice became a controlled voluntary recall, covering 112 timer assemblies. The number was higher than our original estimate because investigators found counterfeit springs in 2 product families Mason had never disclosed to the board. No patient died. I repeated that sentence to myself every morning. No patient died, but 3 hospitals had shortened sterilization cycles, and 1 commercial fire control test had released ahead of schedule. Equipment was taken offline, procedures were postponed, hospital technicians worked through nights replacing assemblies that should never have passed our inspection benches. The Ellison name appeared in newspapers beside the words "safety fraud." Daniel had once told me reputation was the only product a company could never recall. For the first time, I understood that he had been wrong. A reputation could be recalled, it simply could not be replaced quickly. The criminal case developed in layers. Search warrants uncovered payments from Vail Component Recovery to Mason's former partner, from Meridian Technical Resolution to Dana, and from both companies into an account used to cover Mason's personal debts. Prosecutors alleged wire fraud, conspiracy, theft involving employee benefit funds, falsification of safety records, and attempted acquisition fraud. Dana entered negotiations early and began cooperating. Mason blamed her, then Kate, then me. When those explanations contradicted the emails bearing his name, he blamed the pressure of saving the company. Months earlier, that argument might have persuaded Kate. It no longer persuaded a grand jury. He was eventually charged and released pending trial under financial and travel restrictions. His passport was surrendered, his consulting accounts were frozen. The house he had purchased with Kate was tied up by liens and civil claims. There was no dramatic collapse to zero. There were bills, motions, canceled cards, attorneys, and the slow, public dismantling of a man who had built his identity from other people's confidence. Dana was charged as well. Her cooperation reduced what prosecutors intended to seek, but it did not erase the false records, the stage safety failure, or the threat placed inside Luis's truck. Kate faced a different reckoning. She admitted signing the bridge authorizations and delaying the retirement deposits. The evidence showed that she had not created the vendor scheme, but she had allowed employee money to be used after she knew the first promised repayment had failed. Her cooperation agreement required complete disclosure, repayment where possible, and testimony against Mason. The board terminated her as chief financial officer. When she came to my house after the decision, she stood in the doorway without entering. "I thought telling the truth would make me feel cleaner," she said. "It usually makes the dirt visible first. Do you hate me?" "No, do you forgive me?" "Not yet." She nodded as though the answer hurt but did not surprise her. "I don't forgive myself either. That is not the same as making repairs." For once, she did not argue. Luis was reinstated as toolroom supervisor with back pay. His health insurance was restored before his wife's next treatment. At the first all-employee meeting after the recall began, he received a standing ovation. He disliked every second of it. The applause did not solve the company's financial problem. The recall, laboratory testing, legal costs, and North Star's withdrawal consumed our remaining credit. More than $1 million was still missing from employee retirement accounts. Insurance disputed coverage because the losses involved intentional acts by executives. The board could preserve the company or restore the retirement money immediately. It could not do both without outside capital. I owned 42% of Ellison Precision and had enough personal assets to close much of the gap. But most of my liquid savings were already pledged to recall financing. What remained of real value was the lake cottage. Daniel and I had bought it when Kate was 9. He taught her to swim from the narrow dock. We spent our last summer together there after his diagnosis, sitting beneath the maple trees, while an unfinished watch movement rested on the table between us. Selling it felt like surrendering the one place the company had never reached. That was why I knew I had to do it. The employees had not chosen Mason. They had not chosen my blindness or Kate's fear. Their money had been taken beneath the protection of our family name. I sold the cottage, contributed the proceeds, and converted part of my ownership into a secured employee recovery fund. The board obtained temporary financing against the remaining equipment and restored every missing retirement contribution with interest. On the final afternoon, I walked through the empty cottage alone. I removed no furniture. Kate could choose what to keep before the buyers took possession. In Daniel's old desk, behind a warped drawer, I found a small wooden box I had never seen. Inside lay a half-finished wristwatch, a set of tiny hands, and a folded note in Daniel's handwriting. For Emma, when she is ready to build something of her own. The watch was missing one part, a balance spring. 9 months later, the Ellison name was still on the brick factory, but it no longer belonged to my family. That was one of the conditions I insisted upon. Ellison Precision had been reorganized under an employee ownership trust. The machinists, inspectors, engineers, shipping clerks, and office staff now held the controlling interest together. No single executive could sell the company, pledge its equipment, or alter its safety system without independent review. I retained a small non-voting share, no office, no executive title, no permanent seat at the board table. The first week after the restructuring, 3 people asked whether I regretted surrendering control. I told them the truth. I regretted waiting so long. Priya chaired the new external safety committee. She accepted the position only after obtaining written authority to stop production without executive permission. Every heat test was witnessed by 2 employees, and calibration records were stored in separate systems that had to agree before a unit could leave the factory. The triangular acceptance punch was never found. We did not replace it. Instead, the company adopted a new inspection mark, a small open circle divided by a single straight line. It represented a balance wheel at rest. Emma designed it. Luis became director of apprentice training, though he continued insisting everyone call him toolroom supervisor. His wife completed treatment, and returned home. On Fridays, she brought enough food for half the night shift and complained that the younger machinists were too thin. The recall cost us contracts and nearly a third of our annual revenue. Some hospitals never returned. Others required years of monitoring before they would consider purchasing from us again. Trust, like precision, is restored through repetition. One honest cycle, then another. No speeches could shorten the process. Mason never returned to the factory. 6 months after the gala, he pleaded guilty to charges involving acquisition fraud, employee benefit theft, and conspiracy to falsify safety records. The remaining charges were resolved through the agreement, but the sentence still meant years in federal prison, restitution orders he could never fully satisfy, and permanent exclusion from managing companies subject to federal reporting requirements. Dana also pleaded guilty. Her cooperation reduced her sentence, but not to nothing. I attended neither hearing. Justice did not require me to watch them stand before a judge. Kate testified. She sat through 3 days of questioning about every bridge authorization she signed and every warning she ignored. Her cooperation spared her from prison, but she received probation, financial penalties, and a prohibition against serving as an officer of any company managing employee benefit funds. She lost the career she had built inside Ellison Precision. For a long time, she believed she had lost me as well. We did not repair our relationship with one embrace at the courthouse or a tearful apology beside Daniel's grave. We began with coffee on Tuesday mornings. At first, we spoke about Emma, the weather, and the lake cottage's new owners. We avoided the company because every sentence carried sharp edges. One morning, Kate placed an old blue jacket on the table between us. Her debate jacket, she had kept it all those years. "I used to imagine you arriving before my speech ended," she said. "Every time I remembered that day, I changed the ending." "I did too. In yours, did the factory forgive you for leaving?" I looked at the faded state finalist patch sewn over the pocket. "In mine, I understood sooner that it did not need me as much as you did." Kate rubbed her thumb along the sleeve. "I made Mason responsible for seeing me because I was still waiting for you to do it." "I know, and when he began controlling me, I mistook it for attention." I reached across the table but stopped before touching her hand. She closed the distance herself. "I am sorry," she said. "I know, it was not full forgiveness, but it was the first honest minute between us in years." Emma returned to the factory for the final term of her engineering apprenticeship. She refused a management track and chose mechanical design. When someone suggested that her family name guaranteed her future, she transferred to Luis's most demanding training group and arrived before dawn for 6 straight weeks. Daniel would have admired her stubbornness. On a clear morning in October, Emma came to my home workshop carrying the wooden box from the cottage. The unfinished watch lay inside exactly as I had found it. Daniel had completed the plates, gears, escapement, and winding mechanism. He had left the balance assembly open, perhaps intending to teach Emma how to finish it himself. We selected a genuine cobalt nickel spring from the last verified batch produced under Daniel's supervision. I let Emma shape it. Her first coil was too tight, the second leaned off center. On the third attempt, the spring opened and closed with an even breath. We installed it beneath the balance bridge and turned the crown. The wheel began to move. Not perfectly, no new mechanism does. Emma adjusted the regulator while I watched through Daniel's old loop. We worked without hurry until the second hand matched the reference clock. Then we carried the watch to Ellison Precision. The original regulator clock from our first workshop had been restored and mounted in the employee entrance. Not behind glass, but where anyone could open the case and study its movement. Emma placed Daniel's watch beside it. We waited. 1 minute passed, then 10, then an hour. The two mechanisms remained together. 60 honest seconds in every minute. I used to believe a legacy was something you protected by keeping your hands around it. I know better now. A legacy is not the company bearing your name, the house you leave behind, or the money divided after you are gone. It is the standard you refuse to abandon. It is the harm you choose to repair. It is the truth your children are finally free to tell you. Some broken parts can be replaced. Some leave marks that remain visible after the mechanism begins moving again. A skilled watchmaker does not pretend the damage never happened. She makes certain it no longer controls the time. If Ruth's story meant something to you, share where you are listening from, and subscribe for more stories about dignity, family, and the courage to stand up when silence becomes too expensive.